I'll start off with a few words about Helen, which she wrote herself, which I know won't be controversial. I used it in the press release, which she wrote herself. Helen has spent much of her life working in just a handful of years exploring the world of ceramics as a hobby. However, in 2022, she decided to embark on a charity fundraising project of a magnitude few would pursue. With a background in marketing, establishing and running her own public relations company for some 19 years, Helen is not shy to taking on challenges and solving problems where there seem to be none. 10,000 Daffodils has proved to be one of those, and Helen will discuss the project, the successes, the obstacles she and the Daffodil Club have faced along the way, starting production on December the 9th last year. My version of her CD, I think, would be a bit different. It would involve words like charismatic, innovative, creative, dynamic, driven, team player, bulldog mentality, ambitious, won't accept no for an answer, and a team player. And I could go on, but she's surrounded also by a whole team. It's a fantastic team that are molded together. One or two people are not here, but the key players are Nick, of course, is here, Helen is here, Michael is here, and you will hear from all of them because all of them are going to say a few words during this presentation. The dream team. There must be something in Matterdale DNA, a sort of magic dust that produces that special combination of sheer talent and the high performance. I think without more ado, I'll call on Helen to speak to us on her creation, and we look forward to a passionate presentation. Thank you very much indeed.
Welcome everybody, lots of familiar faces in the room tonight, so I think half the room is made up of volunteers from the project. Before I start, I just want to say hi to my mum and dad, because they're on Zoom. I think they certainly agree with the word bulldog about me. Anyway, right, I will move on. So, 10,000 Daffodils, Helen Ratcliffe from the Daffodil Club. Yes, two key members missing tonight, Emma Bray and Jane Petrie. So both tied up with holidays, Easter holidays, and so greatly missed tonight in the presentation. So I'll move on. So what is, for those of you that you don't know, what is Daffodils? It's a charity fundraising art installation of ceramic daffodils. There is, and this is what I call the project from the start to describe what it is, but there's actually a word missing that has appeared since we started the project, and I think the word community is missing, because we have now created an incredible community in this project with over 500 volunteers taking part, which is unbelievable. So thank you. So this is what we're talking about. These things we've made. How many have we made now? We've made over 16,000 of these daffodils. And so that's one, that's a few more. And then I don't know if you've been up to Reg Edge yet, but this is sort of the first site of about 100 together, which is quite spectacular. So when we see 15,000, I think it's going to be even more spectacular up at Lowther. So why are we doing this? Why did we do this? We've got 17 days to go until the installation, so we've not finished yet. So it's why are we doing this rather than why we have done this. And it did all start with Friends of the Eels Waterway with a conversation last February, March, I think it was, with Gordon. And they were talking about making the 2023 the year of art and landscape in Ullswater. And I'm not quite sure if I misheard Gordon, which is quite possible. I thought he asked me if I'd do something. And I don't know whether he did ask that, but anyway, you know, I heard that. And so immediately thought of daffodils because of the connection with the valley, and then and with Wordsworth, and then Emma Bray actually said to me, "Oh, poppies, London poppies, Helen. We could make a lot of daffodils." And so then the idea started rolling from there. And so why daffodils? For those who don't know, perhaps on Zoom, or I'm sure everybody knows here, Wordsworth sort of gained his inspiration for his famous poem, I Wander Lonely as a Cloud, at Glencoe Park. He was on holiday with his sister in Cooley Bridge, and they went for a walk. And it is well documented that she had a great influence on some of the words in the poem, so good for her. And so why 10,000? Because here in the second stanza it says 10,000 saw I at a glance, and that's why the project is called 10,000 Daffodils. But we did make 15,000. We just thought 15,000, more money for the charities, and a greater spectacle when they're out at the castle. So the beneficiary charities, there are 6 charities who will benefit from this project. So the idea is that we will sell all the 15,000 daffodils, and those are on sale now via our website. And the idea is to sell them all and to raise in the region of over £300,000 for these beneficiary charities. So just to run through the charities, Somebody's Music Trust, which is a local Penrith charity which provides music therapy for people who are severely disabled, handicapped, etc. New Horizon Youth Centre is a day centre for young homeless people. One of the biggest homeless population are young people that are not seen because they tend to be off the streets, sofa surfing at people's houses. They don't know, it's very dangerous for their health, and so they provide a place for them to go during the day and get counselling, education, do their washing, etc., and to try and help them to find a more permanent home and a permanent future. And then Ullswater Catchment Management, another one you probably know, which is Danny Teasdale here in Ullswater, who works on working with the farmers to a more sustainable farming approach and to work on the land to alleviate flooding in the valley. Lots of projects that he's working on at the moment. So he is talking about putting the money towards further hedgerow planting for biodiversity and rewooding of streams and rivers, etc. James's Place is a charity that again looks at young people, young men specifically, in preventing suicide, and they're based in Liverpool and London. And then the last 2, Friends of the Ullswater Way, obviously this evening. And then another way, I'm actually a trustee of Another Way. It's an environment education charity founded by Amy Bray when she was 16 years old. She's now 20. It's great having a young boss. Fantastic, the energy that they give. And so, yeah, I'm a trustee of that. And all the finance for this project is being managed by Another Way. So everything is going through the charity there. So how did we ever think we were going to do this? I'm not quite sure. But the first thing that I did was just to make sure that we could actually make these things, to make the daffodils. So back in June last year, I started playing about with some clay, with some shapes, and how to design the daffodil. And there's a few interesting looking shapes up here. I did try making a daffodil with 6 petals all in one go, and it just didn't look like anything. So I then decided to separate it out to 3 petals and came up with a shape. And here are some of the first prototypes. And then when I started making more and more of them at home, I realized that the clay petals would sag while they're still wet. So I had to think about how are we going to have 15,000 daffodils not sagging. And so the solution was apple trays. from supermarkets. So there's a chap at Booth who's been collecting lots and lots of apple trays for us over the last 6 months. It's amazing. Yeah, that was me measuring it to see would it fit in these apple trays. So that was the small daffodils. And while I was making the small daffodils, I thought, how about we make a big daffodil as well, a big daffodil head. So then in July, I went on to work out how to make a huge daffodil. And borrowing Jane Firth's exercise ball up there, I think you can see it here, underneath there is Jane Firth's exercise ball. Sort of made the petals, draped it over. And then you can't let the clay dry out before attaching the trumpet. And so we realised we had to flip the petals, and then they started flopping. And so we had to build a wall of bags of clay up to hold them in place, and then and then connect the trumpet. And so whilst this worked, it wasn't a very efficient way of actually producing them. Because by then I'd had the idea that we'll make 10 of these things. So I then spoke to Dr. Michael over here, and he will talk about the solution that he came up with, which was rather ingenious for us. And so by July, I decided, right, we can do this. I can make these daffodils, the small ones and the big ones. And so the next step in any great plan is to get a team together, because I knew I couldn't do it on my own. So what I did was I invited Michael, Helen, Emma, Chris round for dinner and cooked them a very nice meal, served them some very nice wine, and then asked them about 9:30, what do you think about this? So in July, we established the Daffodil Club. So this is the team. So it's Jane at the end there and Emma, who aren't here this evening. And Aggie the dog obviously provided lots of contribution to the project. So the plan, so tick, we've designed the daffodils, small and the large. And then the next question was the location. I know I can do this, but where are we going to do it? So the obvious place would have been Glencoyne, because that's where Wordsworth got his inspiration, but there's no security there, and these things would have been stolen. But it would have been the perfect place and the obvious place. And so that was no good. And then I visited a couple of other places in the valley, but certainly one that would have been fantastic, but they decided the project itself would have been too large for them to accommodate in terms of visitors, because of the number of cars that would come in to park. And so then Lowther Castle became the obvious next target for them. So more on that later. And then so I started drawing up the plan of what we needed to think about in making this thing happen. So we needed funding for the production of the daffodils, and ideally what I wanted to do was to be able to fund the production completely separately from the money that we raised for charities, so that all the money from the sales of the daffodils goes to the charities. And we kind of just over halfway funded it through, and I'll go into detail about what we did to get the funding later. So not all the way there, but not bad, not a bad shot. Next was thinking about what's all the equipment and materials that we need, where are we going to go for them, how are we actually going to produce these things, where are we going to produce these things, volunteers, how are we going to get people to help us make them, marketing, what are we going to do? And that's my hat, that's my area. All the other stuff I was like, ooh, I don't know how to do this. And then we came up with the idea, so the big daffodils, why don't we have a competition for young people to join in as well? Let's just add something else to the boat on the project. So we added that to the list. And so in September, we finally had a meeting with Lowther, they're such a great partner for this project, not least from the story behind them, the Yellow Earl. Lowther holds the world record for number of daffodil bulbs planted in a session. But I think it was 2012. They planted something like 120,000 daffodils in a session. And so the whole story behind links nicely with daffodils for us. And we have the meeting with them, and I'll let Michael tell you about the location that we made these things in. So that was good news. So back to the funding. So we took 3 approaches to funding. The first thing was I set up a crowd fund, which is the GoFundMe site there, which is you place essentially your story online and then ask people to donate to the project. And so we've raised just under £5,000 that way, which is fantastic. And then I started approaching sponsors, and so the Quiet Side were first to come on board, and then Michael and Jane from Ullswater Way Cottages, and then it was Curry's the builders who just done some work on our house, and Jenkinson's the forest products, who are just one of their sites is just across the road from Lowther. And Lowther themselves have put in quite a lot of funding to this project, so which is great. And then more recently, we applied for a grant through the Daffodil Trust, which was successful, and then a grant through Cumbria Community Foundation, which was from Westmoreland, Feebay and Reged, and that was awarded more recently. So that sort of adds up to just over half of the amount we needed for the production funding. Then we started, as Michael will talk about as well, is looking at what suppliers we needed, what equipment. We did deal with over 20 suppliers on the project, but these ones particularly have given quite some contribution to the project. For example, Northern Kilns have provided us with 2 kilns free of charge for the whole project. Greenlight Packaging, we're going to be using biodegradable peanuts to go in the boxes to pack the daffodils. Greenlight are based in Wales, so the connection there with St David's Day, and they are providing us that free of charge, completely free of charge for 15,000 daffodils, which is amazing. H&H, so the large daffodils we're going to be selling off through an auction, and H&H are supporting an online auction for us free of charge, which is quite great. Valentine Clays provided the clay at 50% price, which is unbelievable. Orange Knuckle was the rubber washers, and they did the whole thing at cost, so nothing in it for them at all. And so MW is Mark Williamson Photography, based here in Watermelon, and he is doing all our photography and film for free. And he's going to be making a film for us at the end of it, so some different length films that we'll be able to use to promote the project, further promote the project. Interlude Ceramics is my teacher, Mary Chapel-Howe, who's based at Broome Hall, and she holds the world record for the number of pots thrown in an hour, which is an amazing achievement. And she's my teacher, and she's put up with me on this project over the last 6 months because I've been bending her ear for advice and using one of her films for some of the firing. So absolutely tremendous support from our sponsors. Ooh, can't really see that very well, can you? That's supposed to be white. Sorry about that. However, the slide here with all the numbers demonstrates the inside of my brain for the last 5 months. I've just been constantly counting things. How many daffodils can we make in an hour? How many volunteers do we need per session? How many seconds do we need? How much clay do we need to prepare? How much glazing? How many do we have to fire every week to get us through to the date? How many volunteers? Again, that question keeps coming up. How many boxes do we need to put them in? How many can we assemble in an hour? So all of this was going through my head and realised that we had to test. We had to test every part of the process. And we are sort of standing here today with one more day of volunteer assembly on Saturday, and then we're done. And we're ready for planting on the 19th of April, which is quite exciting. So what I'm going to do now is, I think the biggest part of this project was volunteers, their contribution, managing them, and some of the stories that have been created as a result of the volunteers. So I'm going to hand over to Helen to talk you through this, because Helen did work with Emma on the volunteers. So really, what can we say about the volunteers other than they have been fantastic? And I know we've got some volunteers here in the room today, so thank you. And also hopefully watching on Zoom as well. So what were the roles that we wanted the volunteers to do? So obviously helping to produce the daffodils. Some of you have been here, you know what it's like. Cutting out, stamping, brushing, quality control, fluting, everything. We've had people in the kiln room helping knit. We've had people helping with the glazing, bottom wiping. That's a technical term. More of that later. And also stem bending. So lots and lots for them to do. We had supervisors. Clearly, Helen couldn't train everybody up herself, wasn't feasible. So we had a system where we allocated a dozen or so supervisors. They were trained up, and then they trained the volunteers. And so that meant that every session was run efficiently. So then we have assembly, and that's a stage that we've been working on today and we'll be doing on Saturday. But that is actually attaching the daffodil heads to the stems. And some of us were a little bit apprehensive about that. We thought it might be a bit too tricky, a bit too detailed. But in fact, the system that Michael will tell you all about is incredibly simple, and we've all enjoyed it and found it very therapeutic. And so we haven't finished in terms of volunteers. We will be planting, as Helen says, we'll be planting. We've got an amazing planting schedule in 2 weeks' time. And then when the display is actually happening, we'll be monitoring daffodils. So more of our volunteers will be coming along to check on the display, making sure everything's still standing. We're going to be running a shop to help people who come to visit, who want to buy the daffodils and perhaps are unsure how to do it. So we'll be helping to boost the sales in that way. And of course, at the end of the display, the daffodils will be picked very carefully and packed and posted to their new owners. And so that will be more work for our lovely volunteers. So so that's where we are really in that. And so how did we recruit this wonderful army of volunteers? Well, we had so many people come to us. I think the Facebook site for Lava Castle was a great source of recruits. And so we had a lot of individuals come through that, then word of mouth. We got our heads together to think about all the groups that exist in the valley and started contacting WI groups, tennis clubs. That's always a good source of people. Where else? Oh yes, sports. The optimists. I can't remember what the optimists are. Youth groups, craft groups, garden groups, yoga groups, schools. In fact, it was wonderful to have the young children involved. It really, really was. And so we had many schools come through the production cabins, but some schools weren't able to come to us. Restraints of the timetabling and sheer logistics and the cost of transporting to us. So Helen, Nick and Emma took daffodils to the schools, didn't you? And that was brilliant. So that increased the number of opportunities for the young people. So yeah, so fantastic social media, posters, and by the end of October, we had 500 plus volunteers signed up to help us. It was more than we could possibly have imagined. So that was absolutely fantastic. Yes, it was a mammoth task. And this was where Emma, who sadly isn't here today to say thank you to, has done such a fantastic job, hasn't she? She created amazing spreadsheets, scheduling people in, juggling people around. It really, really wasn't easy. And of course we had last minute dropouts and things happen, don't they? People can't come on the day. So we set up a WhatsApp group, last minute daffodils, and we were able to recruit people on the day or the day before. And it was usually a little bit of a race, I think, with some of the volunteers, because they were all really keen to help. So that was brilliant. So we really, really were overwhelmed with support. So yeah, I mean, what can we say about it? Personally, as a supervisor and a member of the club, you know, it's been the community that has been built up through the whole process. It has been fantastic. People coming together from all over the county and making friendships, new bonds. And some of the groups were so bonded that when one of our volunteers could no longer commit to that particular day and was changing over to another day, her group gave her a leaving party, which was really sweet. We did Tai Chi, cake. We had cake, boy did we have cake. Hannah, Sharon, and anybody else who baked cakes and brought those in, that was fantastic. The gin lemon drizzle was to die for. We had the WI group who actually, funnily enough, don't bake, but they did enjoy a Baileys with their coffee. We thought that was great. So yeah, friendships, as I say, lots and lots of friendships have been made, and we hope that those friendships will continue when the event is finished. But what's been also really, really amazing is how some old friendships have been rekindled. So Jane Petrie, during one of the sessions, quite randomly met up with a former colleague of hers when she was teaching at the Royal College of Music, and so they've become friends again. They've lost touch. And just today, we have Carol and Carol sitting next to each other here, who discovered at an assembly session this morning that they've been at school together. And they hadn't seen each other since they were 16. And so it's just amazing, the coincidences. So as with all volunteering, I think everybody you get as much out of it as you're prepared to put in. We hope that all our volunteers have put as much out as we feel we have from them. And from all of the Daffodil Club, thank you very, very much. And I will now hand you over to my husband, Michael Reed, who's going to tell you all about the production cabin.
Evening. So the next time I go around to Helen and Nick's for supper, I should be more careful. With a lifetime in construction, I seem to be handed the baton of you make it happen, you make it work. And we had a series of meetings where we fleshed out just what that entailed. The lovely designs that Helen showed earlier on. And so he realised that it's actually 7.5 kilometres of steel. It weighs 1.5 tons. It's about 4 tons of clay. You've got to procure it all from somewhere. And that then became quite a task of where do you put it, what do you do with it, how do you manufacture it. So my early input in all of this was actually drawing up specifications and tenders and sending it out to companies in Cumbria to try and actually purchase all this stuff and find companies that were capable of doing it. And we had a really good response, actually. But on something simple like the stem bending, we had hoped that that might be an automated process, but the cost that came back in was simply unattainable. So we approached, or rather, I approached Thomas Graham in Carlisle and they provided it all cut to 15,000 lengths, cut to 1.5 metre long. And then we did the stem bending ourselves, and having personally done 5,500 of it, it's like tick. But it's about thinking through the problems, as Helen was saying earlier on, and then you work out what you need to do with it. And when we first went to Lowther, and we had a meeting with their top team and Jim Lowther, and we were shown the agricultural barn that they had very kindly given us to us. And we walked in and realised, bloody hell, this is huge. But standing there on an autumnal day thinking, this is great. Then you cast forward to the fact that actually manufacturing would be in December, January, February, potentially the 3 coldest months in Cumbria. We clearly couldn't work in an outdoor barn because you'd all freeze. So it was obvious that we needed some form of accommodation. And through a contact of Jane Petrie's husband Andrew, we got a fantastic deal from Porter Cabin. So we had a 20-foot storage cabin and a 21-foot office unit. Nick and I spent 4 days and we fitted those out with light, heat, power, water, drainage to make them a comfortable and safe environment to invite volunteers into. And that was actually great fun. When this massive lorry trailer turned up, the whole rig was about 60 feet long, and you go, okay, this is big boys engineering now. And all credit to the lorry driver. He placed that container weighed about 8 tons, and he put it down as if it was a Fabergé egg. It was remarkable. We'll have to see if you can lift it up and take it away just as carefully. And then part of this barn used to be used for drying barley back in the day when Lowther grew cereal crops, which it doesn't do anymore. And there was a nice room here. This is the next concrete kiln room. And so we had to put walls up and put doors on it and it's safe, get the water and power sorted out. And then Helen had arranged for these kilns to be delivered. And so they wouldn't fit through the doors. So we had to take down what we just put up, put the kiln in, put the wall back on, and close the door. And got it all wired up, and it all worked a treat, which was just fantastic. I suspect now we'll have a large electricity bill. And the biggest oven was 75 kilowatts, and that's been running pretty non-stop.
Twice a week.
Twice a week for some months. And all this hard work came to a sort of fruition at the beginning of December. Nick and I got it all ready, and on the Monday we started. First volunteers turned up, and it was -7 all week. Water froze, so it's the hot water hand washing that was arranged. Everything else that didn't work because the farm was actually just locked down in ice. But one way or another, everybody got us through things. That's what metals are for. And we were up and running. So,
Next slide. This will take the next slide.
yeah.
Yeah,
Well, Helen's part -8.5.
5%. That was a trout bit.
And then that brings me neatly on to Nick, the man of clay.
Thank you, Michael. That was good timing. We chose to start working in a interesting environment in the coldest part of the year, coldest cold snap I think we've seen, or certainly I've experienced in Cumbria. The production cabin, as Michael quite rightly said, it was lovely and warm and luxury. It was insulated, it had heating, it had lights. The kiln room, concrete block work affair, uninsulated. For the first week or so, it didn't have any heating, but we put some fan heaters in, which got the temperature on one stage up to a balmy +1, which was pretty luxury. Not very good for clay though. So not only at first were we devoid of kilns, we also didn't have, call me old-fashioned, but you've got a kiln room, it's ought to have kilns in it. We also didn't have the slab rolling machine, which we can get to shortly. So we needed to travel to Broome, to Mary Chapel House, pottery studio there to use her manual slab rolling machine. And that we're there and back 3 times a day during the first couple of weeks of production to produce slabs. Now, obviously going on about slabs, what are these slab things? Well, Helen, in working out how all of this was going to work, realized that you need slabs of clay, thin slabs of clay, about 3 or 4 millimeters thick, out of which you can cut the petals. You also need trumpets, because daffodils by their nature have a trumpet as well. So we needed some way of extruding that. So we can see the extruder on the wall, which produces these long pieces, long tubes of clay, which will then cut up into 5 centimeter segments, and then taken through the kiln room to much a farmer kind of look. No. Both of those items start off as a bag of clay there, which is about 12.5 kilos. To produce the numbers of clay, the numbers of daffodils we wanted to do, would usually take about 3 or 4 trays. So each tray would have about 12 slabs on it. So they would be going, that would be about 25 kilos. So it's something in the region of 40 kilos of clay a day we were going through to make the slabs and the trumpets. And as Michael said, in total, we've through the clay kiln room about 4.5 tons, 4.25 tons of clay. We weren't imagining that we'd be making more than maybe 100 a day. That's the way the program went. But these volunteers are amazing. We keep going on about volunteers being amazing. I'm not going to stop. Absolutely fantastic. And learning a process. A lot of people have never touched clay, let alone form something out of it. But very, very quickly, people got together, people got competitive. They started to learn how to speed up the process. And we got at one stage up to 300, a record of 332 produced in one day, which is quite remarkable for people that frankly had never been down that route before. So in the kiln room, we had our volunteers, and it was owned that the production of these components was only made possible by the volunteers coming through. And Helen said it was be crazy to try and put names to the volunteers without having them written down. So let's be crazy for a minute. We had Gordon, who's probably known to one or two of you here, who started off at the very beginning of the project. We had Richard, we had another Richard, we had David, we had a couple of Chris's, we had Mike's, a few Mike's passed through, all helping. We had Carol popping in to do some bottom wiping while I was slapping the clay around. And the chats we had during that time, learning an awful lot about the world. Also, we had one chap called Richard Farncombe, who came up with an interesting invention to speed up the cutting of the tubes into trumpet length. He went crazy. He marked at 5 centimeter increments on a piece of wood, making it nice and simple, just to cut away. We call this John the Measurer. This is, like all great inventions, this has a dual purpose, because at some stages when the piles of daffodils waiting to be glazed got too high between the door and where the light switch is, it's very useful for reaching over just to knock the light switch. That's it. There we go, down that. Right, the ever popular activity also in the kiln room was recycling the clay. Because, sorry, gone off my mark. As these the components were cut out, some wastage came back, some scraps came back, and that had to be wedged back into shape, which is wedging is a form of kneading, and as opposed to kneading in the dough process, which is supposed to put air into it, wedging is supposed to take all of the air out, so you end up back with solid ball of clay that can go back into the process again. And that involved a lot of grunting, much banging of the occasional bad word was heard around, and we see on the next slide, the clay brotherhood of a young chap, 85-year-old Jim Robinson, who's a very famous ceramicist. And I'm passing on a few tips to him about wedging and alongside me. Other things I was involved in was making some diagrams in the evening when we weren't making the clay, making diagrams and posters, signs and stuff. And also we thought we ought to have some inspiration quotes from famous ceramicists. So the one at the bottom there was from John Wedgwood Lennon, who on the seminal 1968 White Album, which was relating to Ringo's obsession with porcelain. You remember, everyone will remember the song "Happiness is a Warm Kiln." And then, of course, from recent popular culture, there's Alan Sugar, who, of course, said to the Daffodils, "You are fired." Yeah, the process. I said beginning to the kiln room was the sort of where the process starts and where the process ends. We would get the formed daffodils, which would be dried out and then dipped in glaze, and then they came back in and they would be glazed in there. And the joy of taking these brightly coloured, beautiful things out of the kilns, especially on a cold day because they're really quite warm when they're coming out of there, was great. You put them into boxes of 50. It's all about numbers. We're counting boxes rather than daffodils. They went into the cabins. They were stored, and until it was time to bring them all out for assembly. And yeah, thank you everybody who helped, who came along, who donated. Thank you everyone that's going to buy the daffodils. It's been an amazing thing to be involved with. I think it's changed a lot of people for the better, and it's all been great. With that, back to Helen, who will tell you all about the rest of the project.
So as Emma said earlier, we had supervisors, and here's one supervisor, Julie, doing her job. And so making sure that all the volunteers are doing the right thing in making the daffodils. I'm going to run through a quick set of slides to show you how we actually made the daffodils. If you remember earlier from when I was playing about the design of the daffodils, I think you saw two templates out of paper. And I realised that we couldn't be cutting the petals out around a piece of cardboard, 15,000 of them. And so I got in touch with an engineering firm to say, could they create a push press to be able to cut them out. And to create the ones, because they would be very specific, they wanted about £2,000 each to create these stamps. So I just thought, that's a bit expensive. So I put my thinking cap on, and instead of having that done, I had them 3D printed at £10 each. So quite a solution. And so when I did create the daffodil, I did draw around a real daffodil and then scale it up. So these are slightly different shapes. When you put them together, it creates the daffodil, the 6-petal daffodil. So these were used to cut out the clay. Here we go, you can see them cutting out the clay. And is this bringing back lovely memories? And then to put the two pieces together, you need to scratch the clay and put some slip onto them. And then we need to create the hole, because we need the hole through for the stem to go through. And then we scratch around the hole, and then we attach the trumpet, and then we flute the trumpet. And so all in the design of what happens with clay when you take it through the process of actually making the daffodil. So we get it to this stage, and then that has to completely dry out. If there's any water left in the daffodil when it goes in the kiln for bisque firing, it would expand and they explode. So these things have to completely dry out. And this was another thing that we hadn't thought about at the barn. They just wouldn't dry out. And so we ended up, Nick and I, taking 15,000 daffodils home and laid them out on our floor and all around our house for about 3 months. But this was a really efficient place, but not just in one place. So the daffodils would go into the hallway. And then when the next load came, those daffodils got moved to room number 1. And then when the next lot came, those daffodils got moved to room number 2. These ones got moved to, so every night we were moving boxes around. So it was pretty hard work. And so when they're dried out, they look like this. And so quite light clay. And they're quite brittle at this stage, and I can do this now because we've made them all, so it's okay. They easily break. And so what happens next is then they get fired to a bisque firing, and they turn pink after the bisque firing. And so this firing, this is Mary's kiln at Interlude. She has this huge kiln. And when they're at this stage, you can just stack them all on top of each other in the kiln. So I could get 600 into that kiln. So every 2 days, I was going to load the kiln and unload the kiln, load the kiln and unload the kiln. That was hard work. And so at this stage, so that in the firing, they get fired to 1,000 degrees. And that firing takes 13.5 hours. And then it takes a further 13.5 hours for the kiln to cool down. So it's a 48-hour process in putting the kiln on, waiting it for it to cool, and then being able to empty it. And after that, they then get glazed, and we have literally each one is dipped into the glaze and then left to dry. And there's quite a few seconds. And Carol was one of our top glazers. We had quite a few glazers happening, but Carol's the top one. And then when they're dipped in glaze, they look like this. So that's glazed before firing. And when they go into the kiln, they can't have glaze on the bottom because once it's fired, it will fuse to the kiln shop. That's where the bottom wiping comes in. So we had lots of bottom wipers as well. Some glazers were incredibly good, and there was never any glaze on the bottom, but some needed the bottom wiping. So there we go. And here are the bottom wipers, some happy bottom wipers. And then they. Oh, am I pointing at the wrong one? Is your battery on? I'll let you. Oh, there we go. There's the.
Let's get the thing back up.
Yeah. All right. So once they're glazed, then they are put into the kilns. We did all the glaze firing at Lowther. And we had 3 kilns there, 2 smaller ones and 1 large one. And this time, when they go into the kiln, they can't touch each other because glaze is essentially glass. So when it's heated up, this is heated up, it turns molten. And if they touch each other, they'll stick together. So these can't sit closely to each other. So the 2 small kilns, we could get 100, and then in the larger kiln, we can get 200. But they have different firing times. And these fire at a temperature of 1222 degrees. And then again, needs another 24 hours to cool down. So I could fire the 2 smaller ones 3 times a week and the large one twice a week, which meant we could fire 1,000 a week. We're still firing at the moment. The last should come out next Thursday, and then we're done on the firing front. So that's now over to you, Michael. So that's when we got to. Oh, sorry, that was So that stage of the daffodil glaze fired, and then we're all ready for assembly. And I'm going to hand over to Michael because Michael was a genius on the assembly process.
Are you going to say something about how you chose the colour? Because the whole story behind that.
Oh, yes, sorry. So I worked, I've missed, worked quite closely with Andrea, who's the head gardener at Lowther. And they were quite particular about the colour yellow that they wanted. And so I spent some time trying to create my own glaze, different colours of yellows, hues of late yellows, buying different samples of different glazes in, and it ended up being one off the shelf that they liked the best. It was a kind of a blind tasting. on the colours. I sort of took them thick, so we whittled that down, then I took them two and they chose one that was off the shelf, which actually made life a lot easier. Because the powder was already mixed and all we have to do is add water to it and that's it. So it was actually, in the end, the right choice for us. But yeah, so that's how we got to the colour of yellow for them. So
But
yeah,
Laura was quite picky about choice of colour. Yeah.
picky, but wanted to be involved in the decision making, which is fair enough. So they're so focused on the gardens, and the gardens are the most important part of the attraction for them. So it's understandable. Anyway, over to Tom.
So in all of this process of curing materials and then the manufacture of the daffodils, I mean, one of the first tools I had made actually was we needed to ensure that the hole in the bottom was as consistent as possible, and also that the trumpet was consistent, even though it came out of Nick's tube beautifully. By the time volunteers had had their fingers all over it, it wasn't necessarily. So I designed, you just sit down and you think about, well, what do we need? So we needed the tool to go inside with a peg on the end of it that matched the hole size we needed. And I got a local wood turner to turn those up in oak, a simple timber mandrel, and that was used to ensure we had a consistency. Otherwise, we'd never be able to assemble them. They'd all be a bit distorted. It was a version of that. It had a little,
Yes, that's right.
Yeah.
I've got one here.
and then that design got adapted later on. Thinking about going back to the stems, initially, so I took some back home and set them up in the barn in the vice and started bending them to a template that Nick had worked out the general dimension. I thought, this is just going to take forever. I can't be doing this. So I thought about it and had a local fabricator on Gilwithy make me up some really simple jigs, a metal bar with a hole in it to the exact length that I need it, and basically poke it in and bend it. And it more than trebled the speed at which you could do it, which, given that we had 15,000 to do, that was really very important. And basically, that is it. So you just poke that in and bend it, and you got a feel for exactly the right angle that it had to do just by muscle memory. And then I'll just check it against a sample on the desk to make sure I wasn't too far out. And that was successful.
How many of those did you do in an hour?
More than 100.
Very cool.
I've got it. I can't remember now how long actually, but it was quick.
Well, we gave Michael a nickname. Michael Fast Spender.
And then 16,000 of them today, fully assembled,
Yeah.
and all boxed up.
Yeah.
So it's been a brilliant process.
Okay.
With you.
Um, so I'm just going to wrap up quite quickly. This is all the sort of stuff that nobody really sees of the work going on behind the scenes, as the brand creation, the website, the social media, the fundraising, the talks, the postage and packaging, which we tested with my mum. So I sent my mum one and it arrived nice and safely, which was fantastic. The counting, the box counting by Helen, having to deal with Royal Mail, which was a significant challenge. But we got there on the postage and packaging. So, and just some of the, a couple of quite nice stories that have happened. Early on in the project, I received an email from a lady called Holly in a town called Rydal in Australia. And that was obviously named after the home. And she wanted to be in touch because they wanted to partner and do the same thing over there, which was quite interesting. And then more recently, I had an email from the head gardener at Dunmore College at Cambridge. And he emailed me to say that they were going to be on Gardens World Live in September. And could they have some daffodils? And I said, you certainly can have some daffodils. If you just go to the shop and buy some, that would be super. So he went to the shop and bought some. And then he came back to me and he said, we have a very specific colour tulip in the gardens at the college at Cambridge. Would you make some for us? So we've made 6 tulips and they're just being fired at the moment, and then I'll be glazing them and they'll be on Gardeners World Live in September with our daffodils, which is fantastic. So yeah, interesting inquiries. Lots of press coverage to date, and I'm sure there'll be more once the installation's live. BBC Look North came today to film, and we were on the news tonight, which is fantastic. And so a huge thank you to Charlotte Fairbairn at Lowther, who's been helping with the marketing side of things. And so yeah, big round of applause for Charlotte. Michael talked about some of the numbers earlier, and just some of the numbers just to comprehend the size of this. And I've tried to make it more reasonable in understanding what 4.25 tons of clay looks like. It's 4 big balls. So 7.7 kilometres of steel for Sternus, everything to Watermillock, etc. And the volunteers, 500 lovely people. And then 167, which means fun times with 500 lovely people. So thank you to everybody. Thank you to all the suppliers. So as we said, next up is planting, 19th of April to the 21st. Then it will be on show at Lowther on the 24th of April to 24th of June. Then we get to pick them, and then we get to pack them and send them off. But that's not enough, is it? It's just not enough. So then we decide to make I decide to make 10 big daffodils. And we've had 8 of them have had either been glazed by notable potters, or the glaze has been designed by notable people, and 2 from a competition for young people. And so the folks that are involved, so these are, that was one I was glazing there. And Jane Petrie helped with the competition in terms of reaching out to schools, encouraging groups to enter. And these will go online for an auction on the 22nd of June for 48 hours. But we will let you know about it, don't worry. And so these are some of the folks that are doing the designs. We can see, so Rory Stewart, Mary Chapelham has done one already, and that's on my windowsill at home. It's beautiful. Dan Pearson, who's landscape gardener, and he designed the rose garden at Lowther. Jim Lowther has designed one, and then this is Matilda, age 7, from Greystoke Brownish. She was the winner of the 5 to 10-year-old. I've had much joy in transposing that onto one of the website, in fact. And then I'm doing one, and then William Humphrey, who is a potter in South Cumbria, did a lot of his training in Japan, and so it has beautiful glazed designs. James Rebanks has given me a design for one, which is quite interesting. And Jim Robertson, who was the guy that Nick was wedging clay with earlier. So I spent some time with Jim learning how to hand make things rather than throw clay on a wheel. And he's well known for his large outdoor installations. So I learned a lot of him, you know, for the big daffodils, that helped a lot on what I learned from him. And then this is Nia, age 11 from Orland Primary School. She was the winner of the 11 to 16-year-old category. So yeah, these will all be auctioned off on June. So 10,000 daffodils, hopefully, fingers crossed, raising, you know, £300,000 plus for charities. So sorry, the big daffodils, each glaze designer has nominated a charity of their choice. So the money that is raised from the auction will go to their charity that they're choosing. How can you help? Buy lots of daffodils. It's simple. Anyway, thank you all very much for listening tonight. And hopefully you can all come and see the daffodils at Bangor on the 24th. Thank you very much.
Well, it's a very humbling position to be in, to be part of the volunteering group on some occasions, and to have seen an idea come from nothing and be fulfilled in such a dynamic and impressive way. I mean, it's really humbling. I've been involved in development projects all over the world for 35 years. Never have I seen something executed with such brilliance, with such enthusiasm. It's just a remarkable experience, and I think we are privileged in this room to hear the story of this project. You kept to schedule. You must have had incredible moments where you had sleepless nights. Are we going to get the production? Have we got the volunteers? And here we are today, countdown mode, and you've done it. And it's just a fantastic achievement. And I think, so I feel privileged and humbled to be a very, very small part of this process and to witness, mainly I have to say with women. There are very few men who maybe, I don't know why.
90%, 10%.
Yeah. But it was just fantastic. I'm going to look forward to the planting process. Just staggering. You know, I think what you've been through, and we're just the sharp end a little bit, but all the thinking, planning, this Heath Robinson stuff. The first time I saw it, I remember in school physics, and there was someone called Heath Robinson who produced these amazing designs. And I went in for the first time, and I saw this thing. What the hell is going on here?
It works.
It works, and you can get people who've never touched any of this stuff before. You put them in a line, and within 20 minutes, they're churning this stuff out. It's just genius. So, from my heart, I just thank you for everything you brought to the community. And I don't know how many other projects in Cumbria have succeeded in mobilizing 500 people. I can't imagine any. I can't even imagine it anywhere else in the world. I have not seen, other than when I worked in Ethiopia, their means of mobilizing volunteers was a slightly different story from the sort of volunteering we've seen here. Question, maybe someone from the audience would like to pose a question.
Can you tell me how the sale? Are they through the Shop Out Lab or through the website or both?
So the question is, I'm going to repeat the question for the Zoomers. The sales, are they through the shop at Ladder or how, or online? How's it done?
We are selling the Daffodils 100% through the website, through our online shop. However, at Louder, we are going to have a physical presence so that if people there are not using the internet, then we can place an order for them. Right. Yeah. And so, and what people have been doing.
Maybe actually, Helen, you could come here because it won't be caught.
Sorry. So, and what some people have been doing is, if some people aren't using the internet, then they've had other people buy them for them. So I know that's happening with the Remedy WI group. So they're buying a bulk amount and then handing them out. So it's just the best way to manage it in terms of inventory, postage and packaging, etc., etc.
Any questions on the Zoomers? Has anything gone wrong? I mean,
Oh yes, lots. Yes, so I forgot to mention the big daffodils. And so they have to go through the same drying process as the small ones do, except the big ones take about 2 or 3 weeks to dry out. And so we got the first 4 done and bisque fired. So to this stage, no problem. The next 3, and given the time frame that we have to get them all through, the next 3, the first one we were delivering it to Mary's, and as we were moving it into her kiln room, we knocked one of the petals and it broke off, and you can't fix it. You have to start again. So we started again. And then we took that next one up to Mary's, and it was sitting up. We got it onto the table this time, which was rather exciting. And then for some reason, the petal fell off. So we had to start again. And then the third one that we made, we got it to Mary's, it dried out, we got it into the kiln, it exploded in the firing. So it hadn't dried out properly. And so there's still some water at the bottom, at the base of it, and it's exploded. It wasn't an explosion, it was just a little piece, but it wasn't fixable. So we had to start again. So I'm sort of touching wood. The penultimate, so the last 3 we still have to finish. One is being bisque fired at the moment, so I can collect that tomorrow and then get that glazed. Another one will go in next week, and I'm making mine last so that we get all the others through first. And so I think mine will come out of the kiln on the 22nd of April. It will still be warm when we put it into the garden. So that's been quite stressful, getting those big ones. What else has gone wrong? But yes, I had a nightmare about the daffodils when we were just looking at assembly with the 2 rubber washers. We took them home and have them in our kitchen. And because the metal, the steel is extruded with oil, they started slipping down the stem. And it was just that night I had a nightmare of that we'd planted all 15,000 and the next day they're all at the bottom. So
that's still happening, you never know.
And that's the next day I said to Michael, please sort this out. And so he did. So yeah, that was a bit of a panic, because frankly nobody's done this before, and so it was just, we had to make it up as we went along for a lot of it, but we got there. Was that, I can't think of anything else that went wrong. No, drastically. Those were quite big things.
And the number of failures amongst the daffodils has been very few and far between, really. General quality control from the teams of volunteers making them has meant stuff's gone back into being re-wedged with the next department. But along the way, a few got through, and then they get weeded out because we've been along.
Yeah.
But,
Any more? Nothing from the Zoomers? Any more questions from here? I'm going to ask the final question from me. I will, of course, ask Gordon just to say a few words, but the obvious question is, what next? You motivated 500 people. They're all so excited and up for it.
I have to say, they've been saying to me, what are we doing next?
Yeah.
I think I'll sleep for a while. I think we'll all sleep for a while. Nick has been there every day with me without fail. I think, yeah, a bit of a rest, I think.
Well, you'll miss the mark, of course. You know, there's the big event in London. The Greenpeace Friends of the Earth Extinction Rebellion.
Oh, when's that?
100, the big one.
The big one, when's that?
100,000 people up to the House of. I think it's the 24th or the 22nd.
Is it Saturday?
Yeah, so if you do a good bit of advertising, you may get themselves, you know.
Oh, that's a good idea.
You know,
Everybody going? Yeah.
Can I ask you to thank once again Helen and her team? I'll just say something about the future events. So, what do I have to say? I have to say that our next event is going to be Colin. We're next talking on the 4th of May. It's going to be after already the inaugural Evelyn Way walk, but it will be Colin Hindle from Fully Bridge, who will give a talk on the history behind this thing. And many people in this room, some people in this room have been intimately involved in the whole Evelyn Way story since the very beginning. So we're hoping to see a lot of people coming out on April the 14th, and for Colin to give his background on the 4th of May. It will take place probably at Granite Daffodils, although I got a message today that some other village halls are now available. I have to resolve that because it clashed with the local elections and all the village halls have been booked.
Right.
Helen, traditionally we have to ask, what charity are you wishing us to donate to?
10,000 Daffodils.
10,000 Daffodils, very good, very good. I'll pass the floor to Gordon, who I'm sure he is one of the solid workers, volunteers as well, so he knows firsthand what it's been. Thank you. Sorry, to work on this incredible project.
Well, it is true. Helen and I did have that conversation. Friends of the Old Waterway, we're doing our own art project this year. It's a virtual art gallery, which those of you who saw Tall Glassman by myself will take some of the great masters and dot them all around Ullswater, and you'll be able to access that virtually online. And that was part of that was going to underpin a bigger art theme that we were doing this year. And Helen and I did have that conversation. Would you like to do something, Helen? Well, yes, you can imagine my surprise when she said she wanted to do the 10,000 daffodils. Sorry, 20,000 daffodils is what she wanted to do. And like Michael, I've got a little bit of experience in production management myself. 20,000 daffodils, Helen, are you sure? The poem only calls for 10,000. You really want to do 20. And it has been amazing because I thought, well, I'm supposed to be this year to do this, I better turn up and help. So I was there on the first day, and then happily worked with Nick in the kiln room. And when it's -7 outside, you're very happy to work in the kiln room because it's really quite nice and warm. But it's been exceptional how the whole project has come together, how this team has gelled, and being part of being, one of the 10%, as was mentioned before, volunteers. Just seeing how people from all over Cumbria, all over the district, have come together and had so much fun and got so much enjoyment out of making Daffodils, being part of this team. And it's been fantastic to have been a part of that. And I'm really proud that I was actually a part of it as well. So and we had a lot of fun, we ate a lot of cake. I probably ate more biscuits than I should have done. So thank you very much for that. I wonder if William Wordsworth himself, and when he's now lies on his painted couch, just wonder what he started, the whole Daffodils thing. And I don't suppose in his wildest dreams he would ever have imagined, one, how that poem has become one of the nation's favourite poems, but also what has actually come from it and spawned from it, and this great team effort. And the talk this evening has been Dancing with the Daffodils, a community project, an amazing community project, and it has been amazing. I think Helen's next talk will be tiptoeing through the tulips. when the university comes knocking on the door. So I'd just like to say thank you very much for an excellent presentation this evening, for a fantastic project, and if you just thank them once more.